early. However, because when we got married, when we came back from our honeymoon, they went right into the studio. The success of the albums happened so fast. It was happening so fast. I didn't know which way was up. It was happening. Secular arena, it just happened so fast. But then I just started feeling like, okay, well, let him get through this success part. Let him get through this first. Then the album went platinum, Just the more success you have, the more work you have to do. People didn't get to know me, and I was standing in the shadow. However, it wasn't standing in the shadow because I didn't want to be seen. I felt that my responsibility was to push him and to support him and to help him reach his goals to the best of my ability. I should have said a whole lot more. I should have just put some stuff right in your face.
Were you taught to be silent?
I was. Because what we do, it was a church thing. Because what we do is this. Listen, you need to anoint every doorpost in that house. Mm-hmm. Go through his closet, shut your mouth, and stay on your face. There was no change. So then I started getting mad because y'all told me if I did A, B, C, and D, God was obligated to do A, B, C, D, E, F, and G. And I looked for it. I had an expectation. But how was I going to expect God to do something and I wasn't willing to do my part?
That's interesting. There was something that freed me up. God told me years ago. So whenever you're praying and nothing happens, mm-hmm. How many of you are praying and nothing is happening? If you're praying and nothing's happening, there is something out of practice.
There you go.
So we have to know when to pray and when to put a practice into play.
That's right.
And that totally changed my life. Mm-hmm. I'm praying about something, praying about something, praying about something, praying about something, and then there's no movement. Mm-hmm. I said, now wait a minute, something wrong somewhere. Mm-hmm. And 9 times out of 10 was something I needed to say, do, or something I needed to say or do.
For years, the world knew her as Bebe Winans' wife. The woman standing just off frame while one of gospel music's stars collected awards, platinum albums, and the applause of church audiences around the world. But behind that image was a woman quietly unraveling in silence, and she finally decided to tell her side of the story. Bebe Winans is gospel royalty. Born in Detroit, Michigan, his rise alongside his sister CeCe Winans in the late 1980s and early 1990s transformed contemporary gospel music. Millions of albums sold. Mainstream audiences embraced them. The church celebrated them. And in 1987, right at the beginning of that explosion, Debra Denise married into all of it. She barely had time to understand what she was stepping into. Within days of returning from their honeymoon, Bebe was back in the studio. The career momentum didn't slow down for the marriage. It didn't slow down for anything. Capitol Records deals arrived. Tours expanded. Opportunities multiplied. Debra later described those early years as moving so fast she didn't know which way was up. She kept telling herself to be patient. Let him get through this album, let him get through this tour, and then the marriage would finally get the attention it needed. But every milestone only created more work, more travel, more distance. She convinced herself that her role was to push him, support him, and help him reach his goals. She was not just standing in the crowd cheering. She worked on fan club correspondence, helped organize industry events, observed audience reactions during performances, and reported back. She was actively helping build the machine, but none of it seemed to create the emotional connection she was desperate for. And instead of saying that out loud, she stayed quiet. The silence wasn't accidental, it was taught. Debra later revealed that church culture played a central role in keeping her silent. She had been told by women in the church that a faithful wife anoints the doorposts, goes through her husband's closet, shuts her mouth, and stays on her face in prayer. Speaking openly about marital pain was discouraged. Confronting emotional neglect directly felt like a failure of faith, so she prayed harder. She sought prophetic guidance. She waited for God to fix what neither of them were fully addressing out loud. Years passed that way. When their daughter Maya was born, Debra genuinely believed motherhood would change things. That raising children together would slow the pace, create deeper unity, and pull the family closer. What she found instead was that the emotional distance between them didn't disappear. It just became harder to ignore. She was now carrying the weight of motherhood largely on her own, physically present inside a family that looked complete from the outside, while feeling profoundly alone from the inside. The lowest physical moment came during an emergency cesarean section. An experience that Sirius, she believed, should have drawn a husband closer to home, should have reordered his priorities. But the demands of the career were still there, still louder. And that realization broke something in her, because it forced her to confront the possibility that no amount of waiting was going to change the fundamental dynamic of the marriage. Counseling eventually entered the picture. But even there, Debra later admitted she wasn't fully honest. She was too emotionally vulnerable to expose everything. She feared being too much, too damaged, too difficult. And she still, underneath all of it, desperately wanted the marriage to survive. She didn't want to be the reason Bebe's career slowed down. So she kept sacrificing her own needs to avoid becoming an obstacle. The marriage officially ended after 16 years. The divorce was finalized in 2003. On paper, it was over. But Debra later said the real battle was only beginning. Everything she had suppressed for 16 years came rushing in at once. The loneliness, the frustration. The years of telling herself this was what faithful wives were supposed to endure. Now there was nowhere to hide from any of it. She had to start asking questions she had been avoiding for the better part of 2 decades about her identity, her worth, and how much of herself she had erased in the name of being a good wife. The turning point came in a hotel room in California. She was alone, emotionally drained, spiritually exhausted. The religious phrases that had once comforted her felt hollow. And sitting there in silence, she stopped performing and started being honest. She later described asking God 3 specific questions. First, what difference does it make who files for divorce if the covenant is already broken? Second, why am I still praying for you to turn the heart of someone who clearly has no intention of turning? Third, what does it say about me that I am begging you to make a man love me? She said those 3 questions changed her completely. She began understanding how much of her spiritual life had become about controlling outcomes rather than facing painful realities. She described the healing process that followed as open heart surgery without anesthesia, necessary, brutal, and completely unavoidable. Then in 2009, 6 years after the divorce, everything exploded publicly. Bebe Winans was arrested while following allegations connected to Debra during a dispute over child custody. Reports stated that an argument at Debra's Nashville home allegedly turned physical, that Bebe pushed her to the ground during a disagreement over visitation. The accusations became national news immediately. For decades, the Winans name had represented gospel respectability, Christian values, and musical excellence. Suddenly, those headlines were sitting next to a domestic assault allegation. The reaction split people immediately. Some of Bebe's supporters defended him completely and questioned the timing of the allegations. Others focused on Debra's years of public silence and what it now meant in context. Bebe denied the allegations, calling them inconsistent with his character. The criminal charges were eventually dismissed after he reportedly completed counseling requirements through a pre-trial diversion agreement, but the scandal couldn't be undone. For Debra, the public controversy forced her to speak openly about things she had buried for years. She later explained that the 2009 situation made her realize how many women inside church culture had been trained the same way she had. To endure, to stay quiet, to pray harder, to avoid exposing any pain that might embarrass the ministry or the family name. That realization didn't just apply to her story. It applied to a pattern she recognized in women everywhere. It became the fuel for the next chapter of her life. Slowly, she rebuilt. Motherhood remained the center. She was determined to protect her children from the long-term damage that public scandal and divorce can leave behind. At the same time, she began speaking at events and in interviews about emotional honesty, healing after heartbreak, and the danger of using spirituality as a substitute for real conversation. Her message wasn't about bitterness toward Bebe or about tearing down gospel music's legacy. It was about what happens to a woman's identity when she disappears inside someone else's story for too long. That message found its fullest form in her memoir, Life Altered, Not Over: My Silent Journey to Wholeness. The book gave language to pain she had carried privately for years. It was no longer just a private wound. It became a testimony of survival, self-examination, and what it actually takes to rebuild a sense of self after that kind of erosion. What made her story resonate so deep was the honesty about her own role. By the time she was speaking publicly in the 2010s and early 2020s, she wasn't positioning herself as a purely innocent victim. She acknowledged that silence, fear, emotional dependencies, and avoidance had all contributed to the collapse of the marriage, not just the demands of a famous husband, and not just the toxic teachings of church culture. She had choices she didn't make, conversations she didn't start, truths she buried instead of speaking. That kind of accountability is rare. And it's exactly why her story kept circulating long after the headlines faded. Bebe Winans continued building his career through the years that followed. Additional solo music, television appearances, radio hosting, and performances that kept him respected inside gospel circles despite the controversies. The divorce and the 2009 situation remain permanently attached to his public image, but his musical legacy never fully collapsed. Debra's story, though, says something that outlasts any single career, because the destruction she experienced didn't happen through constant public chaos. There were no screaming tabloid headlines during the marriage, no weekly reality television meltdowns. The damage unfolded quietly, behind closed doors, while audiences applauded the image being projected in front of them. And that is exactly what makes it so uncomfortable to sit with, because it asks a question every person in a high-profile relationship, or any relationship shaped by public expectation and private silence, eventually has to answer. Who are you when no one is watching the image? And what happens to the person you actually are when the answer to that question disappears for 16 years? Debra Winans found out the hard way, and then she told the whole truth about it. Drop a comment. What part of her story hit different? And do you think church culture still teaches women to stay silent today?